Hey y'all, this is Jessica with Bless Your Heart. Let's make a coffee swirl alcohol ink tumbler today. We're going to start out with this coffee mug and we're going to spray paint it with a light cream color and a dark gray. The alcohol inks I'm going to use today are from Tim Holtz and they're caramel, espresso, and teakwood. And we're also going to use some white epoxy dye. To get started, we're going to go ahead and put some epoxy on this cup, and we're going to use the smallest amount that we can get away with, and this is just Flynn Sister Supply Shop, her Artist Cure. Once I get all that epoxy down, I'm going to use what's left over in this pot and I'm going to put some of this white epoxy dye in there. Now I want this to be pretty opaque, so I'm going to put 2 or 3 drops of this pigment in here because I want it to not be see-through in any form or fashion. To start with our alcohol inks, I'm going to start with the darkest, which in this case is going to be the espresso. And I am just going to drop dots of this all over the cup. I do kind of keep it more concentrated towards the bottom because if you think about a cup of coffee, it's darker at the bottom when we add the cream to it. But you do have some of that that kind of swirls through. So I am going to put a little bit of this all over. Then I'm going to move to the mid, which is teakwood, and I'm going to do the exact same thing. We're going to fill in what's left on the bottom and we're going to bring some of that up closer to the top. And when we get finished with this, we're going to go in with that caramel and we're going to focus that at the top and kind of disperse it a little less towards the bottom of the cup. One of the beauties of working with alcohol ink is they kind of delete or push each other out of the way. So if there's ever a spot that you want a little bit different hue, you can always just add a little bit more of that ink in. And if it gets too dark, add a little bit more of the lighter ink in and it will kind of push the dark out. And then at the end, that will just add to the swirl effect and it'll all look like you're supposed to do that. When you get ready to add your white, you want to keep your stripes or your pieces of white kind of uniform and all go in the same way. That's going to help us get a little bit of that swirl whenever we add our heat gun to it. It's going to give it kind of a place to disperse without looking like you just have a dollop of this here and there. So what I'm going to do is when I'm happy with this first round of white, I'm going to tilt my turner up and then down and let it kind of move on its own with gravity. And I'm only going to do that for a few minutes at a time. And then when I'm happy with how that looks or I'm ready for a different little bit, I go in and use my heat gun. And I just kind of put it right on those white pieces. And that's really just to kind of bloom them out. I don't want to use a whole bunch of heat because I don't want to burn my epoxy. But I'm just trying to kind of flare that white out a little bit and to get my epoxy warmed up enough that it'll swirl a little bit on its own. Now once you get this done, if you want to add more of the inks or more of the white, that's completely user preference. However you want to make your cup look, I'm sure it's going to be marvelous. Now that our epoxy is a little bit more fluid than it was before, I'm going to tilt my turner again and let gravity kind of just pull some of those layers down, just to kind of give it a little bit of a different effect. This is the time that if you find that you have created a bald spot with your inks or your pigments, to go in and add a little bit more of either of those in those bald spots. And you just want to add drops of the ink or strings of the white just to kind of help bring all that stuff back out. I personally want some of my white to be a little bit more white and not so creamy looking. So I am going to add a little bit more of this here and there. And I'm just going to, again, let it kind of spread on its own. This epoxy is pretty fluid right now, so it's going to continue to spread and twirl on its own, and it's going to end up looking pretty cool. Once we're done with laying our inks and our pigments, we're going to let this layer of epoxy dry, and then we're going to go ahead and epoxy this entire tumbler until smooth. And here we go. Thank y'all so much for hanging out with me today. I hope to see you again soon. Bye.